Continuing Aratus from Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Hugh Clough. Here, Caphisias came to him, who had not secured the dogs, which had run away before he could catch them, but had only made sure of the gardener. Upon which, most of the company, being out of heart and desiring to retreat, Aratus encouraged them to go on, promising to retire in case the dogs were too troublesome, at the same time sending forward those that carried the ladders, conducted by Achilles and Mnaesithius. He followed them himself leisurely, the dogs already barking very loud, and following the steps of Achilles and his companion. However, they got to the wall and reared the ladders with safety. But as the foremost men were mounting them, the captain of the watch, that was to be relieved by the morning guard, passed on his way with the bell. And there were many lights, and a noise of people coming up, hearing which, they clapped themselves close to the ladders, and so were unobserved. But as the other watch also was coming up to meet this, they were in extreme danger of being discovered. But when this also went by without observing them immediately, Mnaesithius and Achilles got upon the wall, and possessing themselves of the approaches inside and out, sent away Technon to Aratus, desiring him to make all the haste he could. Now there was no such great distance from the garden to the wall, and to the tower in which latter a large hound was kept. The hound did not hear their steps of himself, whether that he were naturally drowsy or overwearied the day before, but the gardener's curs awaking him, he first began to growl and grumble in response, and then as they passed by to bark out loud, and the barking was now so great that the sentinel opposite shouted out to the dog's keeper to know why the dog kept such a barking, and whether anything was the matter, who answered that it was nothing, but only that his dog had been set barking by the lights of the watch and the noise of the bell. This reply much encouraged Aratus' soldiers, who thought the dog's keeper was privy to their design, and wished to conceal what was passing, and that many others in the city were of the conspiracy. But where they came to scale the wall, the attempt then appeared both to require them and be full of danger, for the ladders shook and tottered extremely, unless they mounted them leisurely and one by one, and time pressed, for the cocks began to crow, and the country people that used to bring things to the market will be coming to the town directly. Therefore Aratus made haste to get up himself, 40 only of the company being already upon the wall, and staying but for a few more of those that were below, he made straight to the tyrant's house and the general's office, where the mercenary soldiers passed the night, and coming suddenly upon them, and taking them prisoners without killing any one of them, he immediately sent to all his friends in their houses to desire them to come back to him, which they did from all quarters. By this time the day began to break, and the theater was filled with the multitude that were held in suspense by uncertain reports, and knew nothing distinctly of what had happened, until a public crier came forward and proclaimed that Aratus, the son of Crenius, invited the citizens to recover their liberty. Then at last, assured that what they had so long looked for was come to pass, they pressed in throngs to the tyrant's gates to set them on fire, and such a flame was kindled, the whole house catching fire, that it was seen as far as Corinth, so that the Corinthians, wondering what the matter could be, were upon the point of coming to their assistance. Nicocles fled away secretly out of the city by means of certain underground passages, and the soldiers, helping the Sicaonians to quench the fire, plundered the house. This Aratus hindered not, but divided also the rest of the riches of the tyrant amongst the citizens. In this exploit, not one of those engaged in it was slain, nor any of the contrary party fortunate so ordering the action as to be clear and free from civil bloodshed. He restored 80 exiles who had been expelled by Nicocles, and no less than 500 who had been driven out by former tyrants and had endured a long banishment, pretty nearly by this time of 50 years' duration. These returning, most of them very poor, were impatient to enter upon their former possessions, and proceeding to their several farms and houses, gave great perplexity to Aratus, who considered that the city was without envied for its liberty and aimed at by Antigonus, and within was full of disorder and sedition. Wherefore, as things stood, he thought it best to associate it to the Achaean community, and so although Dorians, they, of their own will, took upon them the name and citizenship of Achaeans, who at that time had neither great repute nor much power, for the most of them lived in small towns, and their territory was neither large nor fruitful, and the neighboring sea was almost wholly without a harbor, breaking directly upon a rocky shore. But yet these, above others, made it appear that the Grecian courage was invincible, whensoever it could only have order and concord within itself, and a prudent general to direct it. For though they had scarcely been counted as any part of the ancient Grecian power, and at this time it did not equal the strength of one ordinary city, yet by prudence and anonymity, and because they knew not how to envy and malign, but to obey and follow him amongst them that was most eminent for virtue, they not only preserved their own liberty in the midst of so many great cities, military powers, and monarchies, but went on steadily saving and delivering from slavery great number of the Greeks. As for Aratus, he was in his behavior a true statesman, high-minded, more intent upon the public than his private concerns, a bitter hater of tyrants, making the common good the rule and law of his friendships and enmities, so that, indeed, he seems not to have been so faithful a friend as he was a reasonable and gentle enemy, ready, according to the needs of the state, to suit himself on occasion to either side, concord between nations, brotherhood between cities, the council and the assembly, unanimous in their votes, being the objects above all other blessings, to which he was passionately devoted, backward indeed, and diffident in the use of arms and open force, but in effecting a purpose underhand, and outwitting cities and potentates, without observation, most politic and dexterous. Therefore, though he succeeded beyond hope in many enterprises which he undertook, yet he seems to have left quite as many unattempted, though feasible enough, for want of assurance. For it should seem that as the sight of certain beasts is strong in the night, but dim by day, the tenderness of the humours of their eyes, not bearing the contact of the light, so there is also one kind of human skill and sagacity, which is easily daunted and disturbed in actions done in the open day and before the world, and recovers all its self-possession in secret and covert enterprises, which, Inequality is occasioned in noble minds, for want of philosophy, a mere wild and uncultivated fruit of a virtue without true knowledge, coming up, as might be made out by examples. Aratus, therefore, having associated himself and his city to the Achaeans, served in the cavalry, and made himself much loved by his commanding officers for his exact obedience. For though he had made so large an addition to the common strength as that of his own credit and the power of his country, yet he was as ready as the most ordinary person to be commanded by the Achaean general of the time, being, whether he were a man of Dana or of Tritaea, or any yet meaner town than these, having also a present of 25 talents sent him from the king. He took them, but gave them all to his fellow citizens, who wanted money, amongst other purposes, for the redemption of those who had been taken prisoners. But the exiles being by no means to be satisfied, disturbing continually those that were in possession of their estates, Sicyon was in great danger of falling into perfect desolation, so that, having no hope left but in the kindness of Ptolemy, he resolved to sail to him, and to beg so much money of him as might reconcile all parties. So he set sail from Mathana beyond Malea, designing to make the direct passage, but the pilot not being able to keep the vessel up against a strong wind and high waves that came in from the open sea, he was driven from his course, and with much ado got ashore in Andros, an enemy's land possessed by Antigonus, who had a garrison there, to avoid which he immediately landed, and, leaving the ship, went up into the country a good way from the sea, having along with him only one friend called Timanthes, and, throwing themselves into some ground thickly covered with wood, they had but an ill night's rest of it. Not long after, the commander of the troops came, and inquiring for Aratus, was deceived by his servant, who had been instructed to say that he had fled at once over into the island of Euboea. However, he declared the ship, the property on board of her, and the servants, to be lawful prize, and detained them accordingly. As for Aratus, after some few days in his extremity, by good fortune a Roman ship happened to put in just at the spot which he made his abode, sometimes peeping out to seek his opportunity, sometimes keeping close. She was bound for Syria, but going aboard, he agreed with the master to land him in Caria, at which voyage he met with no less danger on the sea than before. From Caria, being after much time arrived from Egypt, he immediately went to the king, who had a great kindness for him, and received from him many presents of drawings and paintings out of Greece. Aratus had a very good judgment in him, and always took care to collect and send him the most curious and furnished works, especially those of Pamphilus and Melanthus. For the Sicyon pieces were still in the height of the reputation as being the only ones whose colors were lasting, so that Apelles himself, even after he had become well known and admired, went thither and gave a talent to be admitted into the society of the painters there, not so much to partake of their skill, which he wanted not, but of their credit. And accordingly, Aratus, when he freed the city, immediately took down the representations of the rest of the tyrants, but demurred a long time about that of Aristratus, who flourished in the time of Philip. For this, Aristratus was painted by Melanthus and his scholars, standing by a chariot in which a figure of victory was carried. Apelles himself having had a hand in it, as Polemon, the geographer, reports. It was an extraordinary piece, and therefore Aratus was fain to spare it for the workmanship, and yet, instigated by the hatred he bore the tyrants, commanded it to be taken down. Well, if we remove history, we don't learn from history, at least the same. But Neocles, the painter, one of Erastus's friends, entreated him, it is said, with tears in his eyes, to spare it, and finding he did not prevail with him, told him at last he should carry on his war with the tyrants, but with the tyrants alone. Let therefore the chariot and the victory stand, and I will take means for the removal of Aristratus, to which Aratus consenting, Neocles blotted out Aristratus, and at his own place painted a palm tree, not daring to add anything else of his own invention. The feet of the defaced figure of Aristratus are said to have escaped notice, and to be hid under the chariot. By these means Aratus got favor with the king, who, after he was more fully acquainted with him, loved him so much the more, and gave him, for the relief of his city, 150 talents, 40 of which he immediately carried away with him when he sailed to Peloponnesus, but the rest the king divided into installments and sent them to him afterwards at different times. And how many rulers end up doing that nowadays? They could restore the community or their country or whatever, but they hand it out to the companies. They hand it out to themselves even, depending on what country you're in, right? Assuredly, it was a great thing to procure for his fellow citizens a sum of money, a small portion of which had been sufficient, when presented by a king to other captains and popular leaders, to induce them to turn dishonest and betray and give away their native countries to him. But it was a much greater that, by means of this money, he effected a reconciliation and good understanding between the rich and the poor, and created quiet and security for the whole people. His moderation also, amidst so great a power, was very admirable, for being declared sole arbiter and plenipotentiary for settling the question of property in the case of the exiles, he would not accept the commission alone, but associating with himself 15 of the citizens, with great pains and trouble, he succeeded in adjusting matters, and established peace and goodwill in the city, for which good service not only all the citizens in general bestowed extraordinary honors upon him, but the exiles apart by themselves, erecting a statue in brass, inscribed on it these elegiac verses. Elegiac? Well, not if it's Latin, but elegiac, yeah. Your counsels, deeds, and skill for Greece in war, known beyond Hercules' pillars are. But we this image, O Aratus, gave of you who saved us, to the gods who save, by you from exile to our homes restored, that virtue and that justice to record, to which the blessing Sicaan owes this day, of wealth that shared alike, and laws that all obey. By his success in effecting these things, Aratus secured himself from the envy of his fellow citizens on account of the benefits they felt he had done them. But King Antigonus, being troubled in his mind about him, and designing either wholly to bring him over to his party, or else to make him suspected by Ptolemy, besides other marks of his favor shown to him, who had little mind to receive them, added this too, that sacrificing to the entities in Corinth, he sent portions to Aratus and at Sicaan, and at the feast, where there were many guests, he said openly, I thought this Sicaanian youth had been only a lover of liberty and of his fellow citizens, but now I look upon him as a good judge of the manners and actions of kings. Formerly he despised us, and placing his hopes further off, admired the Egyptian riches, hearing so much of their elephants, fleets, and palaces. But after seeing all these at a nearer distance, perceiving them to be but mere stage show and pageantry, he is now come over to us, and for my part I willingly receive him, and resolving to make great use of him, myself command you to look upon him as a friend. These words were soon taken hold of by those that envied and maligned him, who strove which of them should, in their letters to Ptolemy, attack him with the worst calumnies, so that Ptolemy sent to expostulate the matter with him. So much envy and ill will did there always attend, so much contended for, and so ardently and passionately aspired to, friendships of princes and great men. But Aratus, being now for the first time chosen general of the Achaeans, ravaged the country of Locris and Caledon, just over against Achaia, and then went to assist the Boeotians with 10,000 soldiers, but came not up to them until after the battle near Chaeronea had been fought, in which they were beaten by the Italians, with the loss of Aboeocritus, the Plutarch, and 1,000 men besides. A year after being again elected general, he resolved to attempt the capture of the Acrocorinthus, not so much for the advantage of the Sicaonians or the Achaeans, as considering that by expelling the Macedonian garrison he should free all Greece alike from a tyranny which oppressed every part of her. Carus the Athenian, having the good fortune to get the better in a certain battle of the king's generals, wrote to the people of Athens that this victory was sister to that at Marathon, and so may this action be very safely termed sister to those of Pelopidas, the Thebar, and Thrasybulus, the Athenian, in which they slew the tyrant, except perhaps it exceeded them upon this account, that it was not against natural Grecians, but against a foreign and stranger dominion. The isthmus, rising like a bank between the seas, collects into a single spot and compresses together the whole continent of Greece, and Acrocorinthus, being a high mountain springing up out of the very middle of what here is Greece, whensoever it is held with a garrison, stands in the way and cuts off all Peloponnesus from intercourse of every kind, free passage of men and arms, and all traffic by sea and land, and makes him lord of all that is master of it. Wherefore the younger Philip did not jest, but said very true, when he called the city of Corinth the fetters of Greece, so that this post was always much contended for, especially by the kings and tyrants, and so vehemently was it longed for by Antigonus that his passion for it came little short of that frantic love. He was continually occupied with devising how to take it by surprise from those that were then masters of it, since he despaired to do it by open force. Therefore Alexander, who held the place, being dead, poisoned by him, as is reported, and his wife Nicaea, succeeding in government and the possession of Acrocorinthus, he immediately made use of his son Demetrius, and giving her pleasing hopes of a royal marriage and of a happy life with the youth, with whom now, growing old, might well find agreeable with this lure of his son, he succeeded in taking her, but the place itself she did not deliver up, but continued to hold it with a very strong garrison, of which he, seeming to take no notice, celebrated the wedding at Corinth, entertaining them with shows and banquets every day, as one that had nothing else in his mind but to give himself up for a while to indulgence and pleasure and mirth. But when the moment came, Abuse began to sing in the theatre, and he waited himself upon Nicaea to the play, she being carried in a royally decorated chair, extremely pleased with her new honor, not dreaming of what was intended. As soon, therefore, as they were come to the turning which led up to the citadel, he desired her to go on before him to the theatre. Before himself, bidding farewell to the music, farewell to the wedding, he went on faster than one would have thought his age would have admitted to the Acrocorinthus, and finding the gate shut, knocked with his staff, commanding them to open, which they within being amazed did, and having thus made himself master of the place, he could not contain himself for joy, but, though an old man, and one that had seen so many turns of fortune, he must needs reveal it in the open streets, and the midst of the marketplace, crowned with garlands and attended with flute women, inviting everybody he met to partake in his festivity. So much more does joy without discretion transport and agitate the mind than either fear or sorrow. Antigonus, therefore, having in this manner possessed himself of Acrocorinthus, put a garrison into it of those he trusted most, making Persaeus the philosopher governor. Now, Aratus, even in the lifetime of Alexander, had made an attempt, but a confederacy being made between Alexander and the Achaeans, he desisted. But now he started afresh with a new plan of effecting the thing, which was this: there were in Corinth 4 brothers, Syrians born, one of whom, called Diocles, served as a soldier in the garrison, but the 3 others, having stolen some gold of the kings, came to Sicyon, to one Agius, a banker, whom Aratus made use of in his business. To him they immediately sold part of their gold, and the rest one of them called Erginus, coming often thither, exchanged by parcels, becoming by this means familiarly acquainted with Agius, and being by him led into discourses concerning the fortress. He told him that in going up to his brother he had observed in the face of the rock a side cleft leading to that part of the wall of the castle which was lower than the rest, at which Agius, joking with him and saying, "So, you wise man, for the sake of a little gold you have broken into the king's treasure, when you might, if you choose, get money in abundance for a single hour's work. Burglary, you know, and treason being punished with the same death." Erginus laughed and told him then, he would break the thing to Diocles, for he did not altogether trust his other brothers, and returning within a few days, he bargained to conduct Aratus to that part of the wall where it was no more than 15 feet high, and to do what else should be necessary together with his brother Diocles. Aratus therefore agreed to give them 60 talents if he succeeded, but if he failed in his enterprise, and yet he and they came off safe, then he would give each of them a house and a talent. Now the 60 talents being to be deposited in the hands of Agius for Erginus and his partners, and Aratus, neither having so much by him, nor willing, by borrowing it from others, to give any one a suspicion of his design, he pawned his plate and his wife's golden ornaments to Agius for the money, for so high was his temper and so strong his passion for noble actions, that even as he had heard that Phocion and Epaminondas were the best and justest of the Greeks, because they refused the greatest presents and would not surrender their duty for money, so he now chose to be at the expense of this enterprise privately, and to advance all the cost out of his own property, taking the whole hazard on himself for the sake of the rest that did not so much as know what he was doing. And who indeed can withhold even now his admiration for and his sympathy with the generous mind of one who paid so largely to purchase so great a risk, and lent out his richest possessions to have an opportunity to expose his own life by entering among his enemies in the dead of night, without desiring any other security for them than the hope of a noble success. And see, I insert the word he, because it makes more sense using the word he, and there's 2 or 3 other instances. I think there's about 3 other instances where I've done that with he in this book here, which for 1,230 pages that are more wordy than pretty much any book I have. Now, the enterprise, though dangerous enough in itself, was made much more so by an error happening through mistake in the very beginning. And so he was using his possessions to have an opportunity to expose his life. That kind of hits kind of hard, stronger than either of those ones by themselves. But people, with their money and their lives, if the cause is worthwhile, that's certainly the approach to make, right? Not that one, makes oneself broke when it's not necessary or something, but, for Tecton, one of Aratus' servants, was sent away to Diocles, that they might together view the wall. Now he had never seen Diocles, but made no question of knowing him by the marks Erginus had given him of him, namely that he had curly hair, a swarthy complexion, and no beard. Being come, therefore, to the appointed place, he stayed waiting for Erginus and Diocles outside the town, in front of the place called Ornis. And, I've said, he could have withheld his wealth, as we see there. But it was all about producing the noble success, not just a success, but a noble success. But how many wars are fought without nobility? I mean, real really. Maybe, some of the soldiers have chosen it on themselves, but it's not really part of it. In the meantime, Dionysius, elder brother to Erginus, and Diocles, who knew nothing at all of the matter, but some resembled Diocles, happened to pass by, Technon upon this likeness, all being in accordance with what he had been told, asked him if he knew Erginus, and on his replying that he was his brother, taking it for granted that he was speaking with Diocles, not so much as asking his name or staying for any other token, he gave him his hand, and began to discourse with him, and asked him questions about matters agreed upon with Erginus. Dionysius, cunningly taking the advantage of his mistake, seemed to understand him well, and returning toward the city, led him on, still talking without any suspicion. Now see, whatever the sort of actions, it's not reckless, but it's, directed, right? And being now near the gate, he was just about to seize on him, when by chance again Erginus met them, and apprehending the cheat and the danger, beckoned to Technon to make his escape, and immediately both of them, betaking themselves to their heels, ran away as fast as they could to Aratus, who for all this despaired not, but immediately sent away to Erginus to Dionysius to bribe him to hold his tongue, and he not only effected that, but also brought him along with him to Aratus. But when they had him, they no longer left him at liberty, but binding him, they kept him close shut up in a room, whilst they prepared for executing their design. All things being now ready, he commanded the rest of his forces to pass the night by their arms, and taking with him 400 chosen men, few of whom knew what they were going about, he led them to the gates by the temple of Juno, Jupiter, basically. It was the midst of summer, and the moon was at full, and the night so clear without any clouds, that there was danger lest the arms glistening in the moonlight should discover them. But as the foremost of them came near the city, a mist came off from the sea, and darkened the city itself and the outskirts about it. Then the rest of them, sitting down, put off their shoes, because men both make less noise, and also climb surer if they go up ladders barefooted. But Erginus, taking with him 7 young men dressed like travelers, got unobserved